Hello and thank you for watching Hotline 21. This is a live call-in television program. My name is Angela Moss and I am a domestic violence counselor and advocate from Connections for Abused Women and Their Children. There at the program, I am a full-time domestic violence counselor and advocate from our outreach site, Haymarket Center. Today, me and my guests will be talking to you about a topic, or topics, I should say, pertaining to domestic violence. During that time, feel free to give us a call at the number below on your screen, I should say, for any questions or comments pertaining to domestic violence. The number you should call in to would be 312-738-1060. So again, this is Hotline 21, and thank you for joining. I want to first start by having our guest introduce herself and tell us a little bit about herself and what she does for the agency.
Hi, my name is Wendy, and I am a counselor/advocate for the Greenhouse Shelter, which is a residential program for CAWC. There we provide services for women. We help them find housing. We provide counseling services. We do referrals. Our main goal is to help women be able to stand back in their feet and be able to live a life that is free of violence, not only for themselves but also for their children.
Yes, and so that is the program that Wendy works for. It's a great program for women and children, or also for single women as well. And I'm glad that, Wendy, you told us a little bit about that program, because most time people, when they think about shelters, they think about the places where they have to go, have to leave early in the morning, pack their children up, pack all their belongings up and leave, because they also feel like sometimes those programs are not safe. So thank you for giving me and the viewer some feedback about Greenhouse Shelter and what they do. In addition to that, can you tell me what the process looks like if someone was watching us right now and they were seeking domestic violence services for themselves or for their children? Can you just give us a little bit of what the process looks like?
They can either call the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline and they are referred to our program, or they can call directly to the shelter, and we ask them a couple of questions, but the main purpose, the first question that we ask is if they're in a safe place to talk, and if there's anybody or anything that we can do for them, whether it's calling the police or informing a relative of the situation, or whatever it is that they need at the moment. Once their safety is ensured, then we proceed into making sure that they can talk, and if so, ask where they are, if they're safe, if they have children, why they're seeking shelter, to kind of get a little bit of, an input and a little bit of history as to why they decided to make that phone call. And once we do get that information, then we go ahead and proceed into doing what we call an intake, where we ask them a couple of personal questions and questions about, the situation and making sure that they're safe. Then we explain the rules and guidelines of the program, and then we go from there.
Okay. Yes, and so I just wanted the viewers to know a little bit about the process, because it is a process, and so you want to be ready if you're out there and you're looking for domestic violence shelter, because it's also a program where you want to make commitments that you are going to follow the rules and guidelines, and that you want to maintain your safety for yourself or for your children. Also with that, can you define for us, what do you think domestic violence is? Because I know that everybody has a definition for it, but tell us just what you think it means.
When someone is trying to exert power and control over another person,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's verbally, sexually, or in any other form or way, it's basically just a form of power and control from one person to the other.
Yes, and in terms of that definition, I just want to add a little bit to it, if I can. In terms of domestic violence, when I think about it too, it is really one of those kind of issues that affects everyone. It affects everyone in the family. It affects a person whether they're in a same-sex relationship or whether they're in a male-female relationship. It affects children. It affects people that have income, no income at all, whether you're married or divorced. Domestic violence can impact anyone. So yes, and I wanted to put that out there too, because some folks have misconceptions and myths about domestic violence, that it only happens to certain kind of people.
Not only that, but also
Mhm.
people feel that just because we're in this field, we're not prone to become victims of domestic violence ourselves. And again, that's also a myth, because it can happen to us just as well as it can happen to anyone else.
Absolutely. And so the goal today is also to give education so that you all know that domestic violence is not exempt, right? Wendy, can you tell us about some well-known types of abuse? Because I know there's probably, I can think about 40 off the top of my head, but there's some well-known ones. Could you tell us what those would be?
I think one of the ones that most of us do know is physical.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's a slap or, grabbing you in some hard way, or
Mm-hmm.
a punch, or beating you so severely that you end up in the hospital. That's physical abuse. We also have emotional abuse, where they don't necessarily have to hit you, but just by bringing you down or making you feel like you're not worth something, that is also another form of abuse, as well as sexual abuse. If you tell your partner, no matter whether you're married or you're not married, if it's just a friend or whoever it may be,
Mm-hmm.
no means no. And if, it happens more than, when you say no and it still happens, that's pretty much considered rape, and that's still sexual abuse.
Yes. So those are some of the ones that people that are well known, right?
Yeah.
But there's also some types of abuse that are kind of subtle, right? There are patterns, or there are types of abuse that if you really don't know about domestic violence, you can kind of overlook them. And so would you like to tell us what some of those types of abuse would look like?
It could be manipulation. I don't want you talking to certain people. It could be isolation, where, even with people that you used to hang out with, now you can't hang around with them, or including your family, they start manipulating, who you talk to, who you can't. And we also have where they're checking your messages, your phone calls, who you're talking to, and it's just a feeling of just insecurities from the person, as well as like withholding certain information, or like preventing you from getting to doctor's appointments, or receiving certain medications, or treatment for certain things. And so things like that are also forms of abuse.
Absolutely. A person going through your mail, right? Because as individuals, we are supposed to be able to have our own identity and relationships. So being with someone who's checking your mail, checking your purse, checking your wallet, calculating the time, how long it takes you to get home, why you're not answering a telephone call. So all of those things pertaining to where that person is controlling you in some kind of way, those would be also those subtle things in terms of domestic violence. And then finally, there's other types of abuse, Wendy, that are kind of overlooked. Do you want to tell us what those types of abuse would be?
It could be economically, spiritually. I mean, taking your money away from you, or not giving you, if that's your provider, then not giving you money for basic necessities, preventing you from, having your own religious beliefs, having you believe what they want you to believe, no access to certain things, at the same time also like deciding whether or not you have the right to have children or not have children, when you should have children, when not to have children, things like that.
Yes. Another type of abuse that's overlooked too would be abuse where I feel like abusers they know a lot about technology, right? And so let's say that someone's even in a same-sex relationship, and one person knows a lot about technology, but the other person doesn't. So the abuser may start to go through the internet, breaking that person's passcode, going through, looking at their messages, at their emails, and things like that. And so because that victim may not know how also to put a passcode on there, not even thinking that, oh, my partner's going to go through my cell phone or go through my emails. That's a form of abuse as well, right? And it's pretty big nowadays, and it's pretty overlooked as well. So Wendy, can you tell the viewers, who are the victims? Who are the victims in abusive relationships?
I mean, anybody can be a victim of domestic violence. As you mentioned earlier, I mean, it doesn't, set you apart whether you're white, light skin, dark skin, short, tall, whether you're a child, whether you're an adult, whether you're a female, you're a male, whether you're heterosexual or bisexual or transsexual, whatever it may be, victims will be victims of abusers with, just any age, any sexual preference. Just we're all prone to being victims, just as we are all prone to becoming abusers ourselves.
Absolutely. And I also think with that, I just want to add that, yes, everyone can be an abuser, but there is also certain populations of folks who are always going to be a little bit more prone to domestic violence. And that is one thing I find is being in a facility where I provide services to survivors who are addicted to drugs and alcohol. Right? When that person's under the influence of something, it's likely that person is going to be abused a little bit more. The person may get abused by the persons that's supplying them drugs, whether it's the perpetrator, whether it's the drug dealer, whether it's sometimes friends or family members that are toxic when that person's in an abusive relationship, right? Also children. I think children sometimes as that population that, when people are not looking out for them, right, and they don't use their own power and control, they have other adults sometimes that often are abusive to children because they don't really have that voice like that, right? Mm-hmm. The elderly, is another population that gets taken advantage of in terms of domestic violence services. So, yes, Wendy, thank you for giving us that information. You are watching Hotline 21. This is a live interactive television program. My name is Angela and this is Wendy. We're both from Connections for Abused Women and Their Children. We're talking about domestic violence today. Feel free to call us here at the studio with any questions or concerns about or even about domestic violence. The number is 312-738-1060. And also, if you wanted to call the agency in that we work for, Connections for Abused Women and Their Children, the number is here, 773-278-4566. You can call, you can speak to someone confidentially. You don't have to tell them who you are or anything like that. You can let them know that you are in a possible domestic violence relationship, or that you have questions, or that you're seeking shelter, and someone will be able to answer your call and give you the information that you need to.
May I add something?
Of
For
course.
all those viewers who are hesitant about calling our hotline, I must say that all information provided by you guys is confidential. Nothing is released to anyone, and we will not be contacting nobody, or especially not your abusers. So please, if you feel like you need to talk to someone, or even if you just want information, go ahead and make that call. None of your information will be disclosed to anyone. Again, it is all confidential.
And again, when you call, if it's just questions, if it's just concerns, because I know sometimes some folks don't even realize they're in an abusive relationship. So sometimes they don't even have the family or friends to be able to process that with. So sometimes they may need to call someone who is not within their family system, to be a person who's not judgmental, and be able to give them feedback on domestic violence too. And also the final thing about our program too, if you speak Spanish or another language, we definitely try to accommodate the person who's calling in to ask for information about domestic violence as well. So Wendy, you want to tell us who are the perpetrators?
For the most part, some characteristics are the person can be controlling, constantly blaming the victim.
Mm-hmm.
They begin to isolate you. They have a history of abuse. Just want to know anything and everything. A lot of jealousy. They often feel like they have to be in power. If it's not that way, then they start making you feel like you're inferior so that they can gain the power. But it's always them being on top and the victim being, they're very submissive to what they have to say.
Mm-hmm. And then also with abusive or perpetrators too, they have that power and control, but then at times when the victim wants to put in some kind of boundaries, with a person, then the person becomes sensitive. So some abusive people have the tendency to be sensitive at times when they're trying to regain that power and control in the relationship. Abusers are also people who don't follow rules and regulations. They don't respect boundaries either, right? Abusers are individuals that try to get the person into a quick relationship. It's kind of like, I love you, you want to get with me, let's be together, and they're not respecting what the other person may, their boundaries may be in terms of a relationship too. So they're kind of pushy, abusive people. So those are some of the characteristics of an abusive person. Oh, one thing I should add too: abusive people usually have a past history of abuse too. And most victims feel like sometimes when abusers are that way, they're just that way with them. Right? They never have been that way with any other person. I've caused this person to be this way. I'm the reason why they hit me. I'm this, I'm that. But usually, most abusive people, they have that behavior and that attitude in other relationships too. Right? It just kind of shows up in their intimate relationship with the person. Right? So those are some characteristics. Also, when you think about abusive relationships, what do you think some causes of an abusive relationship? I know that some people say that that person drinks because they're angry, because they're stressed out, and all those other things. That's why abuse happens. So what's your take on what is the cause of abuse, I should say?
It depends. I mean, drinking and doing drugs and stuff like that does have an impact in how violent the perpetrator is.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what is causing the abuser to become an abuser. It could be, like we said, it could be history of abuse that unconsciously, I mean, they see patterns of abuse as being something normal.
Yep.
It could be something, I mean, certain like events that may trigger them to become abusive. I mean, there's several different factors that can contribute to a person becoming an abuser, and it's not necessarily just because they're consuming some type of illegal substance or alcohol or whatever it is that it may be.
Absolutely. And the overall cause, when you think about those things, Wendy, the underlying one is just power and control. Because that person has a choice whether they want to be abusive or not. An abusive person chooses to want to take power and control over the relationship. They kind of see it as my way or no way, right? Which is a hard relationship for a person to be in, where it's unequal and the power is unequal in a relationship. Yes. Talk to us about, if you can, children in domestic violence.
I know a lot of times people think that just because children, no matter how small they may be, he didn't really see or he wasn't present during the abuse, but a child's mind is like a sponge, and so everything that happens, they can sense it, and whether they were present or not, they can always tell that something is wrong. And children who do witness are also at risk because oftentimes they may jump in if they see that somebody's being attacked, and so they're going to try and automatically defend, and then we're putting them at risk because then they can also get hurt. And so it's very important to take that into consideration, that it's not only violence towards grown-ups, but it's also violence towards children, and oftentimes children can't defend themselves or don't have a voice, as you mentioned, and so they get taken advantage a lot easier than adults do oftentimes.
Thank you for sharing that, Wendy. And that's why, if you're out there and you're in an abusive relationship and you have children, it is important to figure out what you're going to do with that relationship, because as the victim, you're being injured, but also the children are being injured directly and sometimes indirectly.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm not saying that abusive people go around hurting children, but sometimes, as Wendy said, children get hurt just by watching. Right? And when children watch, actually that's a form of abuse. When children watch abuse, that is emotional abuse, is what it is. Right? Because the children become confused. They don't know what's going on in the relationship. Sometimes they are, the abuser may even ask children to choose sides
Indeed.
right? They may put the children in the middle of their abuse at times, which also confuses children, right? Because it becomes the child has to decide, am I this way or am I that way? Do I believe this person? Do I support that person? So it's a really damaging relationship to be in for kids.
Abusers also tend to get the kids on their side, so they may convince the child that the victim is the one who caused or who like initiated for them to receive the abuse that they did, and so that does confuse the children most of the time.
And in terms of domestic violence in children, what ends up happening is that children also pick up certain roles in that relationship, right? Some roles that are not healthy for the kid, right? And that can be the peacemaker, that can be the scapegoat. There are just so many roles that kid. And then not only that, but it affects them emotionally, psychologically. So yes, if you are watching Hotline 21, my name is Angela. This is Wendy. We have been talking to you about domestic violence. If you need to call in to our program, which is Connections for Abused Women and Their Children, that's the hotline number. If you need to talk about domestic violence, seek shelter, or ask questions, it's 24 hours. Yes, and so we have a couple more minutes if you like to call in with any questions or comments, 312-738-1060. And so, Wendy, we will proceed on if we have no callers, and then we'll wrap it up at some point. So can you tell me, what are some of the barriers for a person staying in an abusive relationship?
Oftentimes, victims hesitate to leave the abuser because they're threatened. They have no place to go, especially in this kind of weather. If they have children, where they're going to go, they can't have them out on the street. Also, too, I mean, they have no support system. I mean, there's several factors that contribute to it being difficult. At the same time, oftentimes they do end up leaving the abuser, but the abuser comes and like finds them every time they are able to escape, or somehow promises to change, and then the victim goes back to the abuser, but the abuser ends up not changing.
Mm-hmm. So it's tons of reasons that a person stays in an abusive relationship. And earlier, Wendy and I were talking about children. Children sometimes as a factor why a person may stay in an abusive relationship, right? Because even though it's an unhealthy environment, children also become emotionally sick or physically sick sometimes because they want to be home, right? They want to be with them, around the perpetrator, even though that person is harming the other parent. You know, sometimes the mother may say or father may say, let's go back into the environment because I don't want this child to feel sick or feel like emotionally distraught because they're not there. So sometimes some folks say, you know what, let me stay in this relationship because I don't want my children to suffer in that way. And I don't know if that's a really good decision, but it's also a survival tactic for some families to be able to do that. So children become the factor. Again, you're watching Hotline 21. I'm Angela. This is Wendy. The hotline number where you can call for questions is 773-278-4566. There's someone there 24 hours a day to be able to talk to you. Wendy, we're almost at the end of the show. Is there anything that you would like to say to the viewers before we end the session of Hotline 21?
Just if you feel like any of the things that we've talked about pertain to you, please don't hesitate to call. As we mentioned before, I mean, all the information provided is confidential. We will not release or disclose any information to anyone. And I mean, the agency is there to help anyone that needs our support, even if it's just to talk.
Yes, and so again, you're watching Hotline 21. You can definitely call our agency, 773-278-4566. It's 24 hours to talk about any domestic violence issues or concerns or shelter that you may have. I should also add, with the number that you're going to call, if for some reason shelter or domestic violence shelter is full, the person that will answer the hotline would also connect you over to our city's hotline to be able to find you somewhere safe to go in terms of if you're in an abusive relationship. Yeah, so thank you for watching. See you next time on CAN TV Hotline 21. Good evening.